you are interested, we'll bring it out afterwards. In Manly Palmer Hall's masterwork, the great big book, which was the first big thing that he published, you have as a title or subtitle the Hermetic, Kabbalistic, Masonic, and Rosicrucian symbolic philosophy. That's really the title of the book. Later on they made sort of a subtitle out of it. But you can see that they tried to include in the title all the known appellations, words that relate to what we generally now sum up as the esoteric tradition. And as such, that is quite true. The reason that there has been less attention until the 1970s to less attention lavished on Gnosticism than on Hermeticism or Hermetica is primarily due to the fact that unlike the Hermetic books, there was practically no original literature, very little original literature available from the Hermetic sources. In fact, until the Renaissance period, the beginning of the Renaissance period, sort of 1400s, 1500s, there was practically nothing. And as this often happens, I mean, these were 1,000-year-old writings. All of a sudden they turned up. They turned up in Byzantium and then on the Balkans, because whoever had it, the Byzantine guardians of the written material, had divined that the Turks were coming, which was sort of the in those years the equivalent of in our times the Russians are coming. And so all of a sudden, after all that time, the literature became available. But the sizable Gnostic literature did not become available until our times, until it was discovered right after World War II. So, and even then, it's a much smaller number of documents. So that, I think, and other circumstances, which I will mention, had made the Hermetic literature better known and more often commented upon, although not always in a very good way, throughout the centuries. I think my first encounter, as I'm trying to reach back through, or I almost said reach back through the centuries to my childhood, where I may be old, but I'm not that old. In any event, as I reach back not exactly through the centuries, I think I have encountered it as an appellation, as a description of something that is very tightly closed. This is hermetically closed. Like, I don't know, you're trying to open a bottle or something like that, my father would say, oh, that one will be hard because that is hermetically closed. And so then subsequently I found out that that is an expression taken from alchemy, when on the surface, for certain alchemical processes, the substance that was being worked on alchemically would be very tightly shut. Not always, but sometimes. So then later on I discovered that hermetic materials can be found elsewhere, but in bottles. So that certainly has enriched my local. By the way, as you probably know, probably age-related, my voice is not what it used to be. So if you can't make it out too well, I don't want you to remain in the dark, so to say, sound-wise. And just put up your hand and I'll repeat it again, because I have, for many, many years of my life, I have been able to speak often to very large audiences in very large places, and so it really annoys me when I find out that now sometimes people cannot hear me. So I'll repeat it anyway.
Well, you speak very clearly. Just you might need more volume at times.
Yeah, volume probably not enough strength. From my last incarnation, when they cut my head off under the guillotine, they would have if they met me. There are two revolutions that I detest: the French Revolution, and which certainly not the American, and the Russian Revolution in the 20s. So you will never hear me say anything particularly good about them. And some of that really based on almost personal experience, because my great-grandfather, who was an Austrian subject at the time, had come from Bavaria to Austria, to Wiener Neustadt, where the family lived for a long time. My great-grandfather found himself on a business trip to Paris when the Reign of Terror broke out. And he was so traumatized that he made it public that he wanted to move to a country as far away from France as possible and still be in a civilized country. And so for that purpose he chose Hungary. And since then my family lived there. I'm sure this is of tremendous interest to you, but I thought I'd mention it anyway. In any event, the Hermetic matrix, as I say, became known under that name primarily after the Quattrocento, Quinquecento of the Renaissance, the earlier centuries of the Renaissance, and from then on, because it had become available and was post-haste translated to many books, much larger library than the Nag Hammadi library, is the Corpus Hermeticum with all of the various volumes in it. So then after that it was read and studied, and applications of it were made on numerous occasions, and as such, either for that or a different reason, it became known as probably the oldest and the primary source of what now generally we call the esoteric tradition, the Hermetic books. Now then, on the other hand, the Gnostic books, such as the Nag Hammadi library and so forth, have two things that are difficult with them. One is that they turned up very late in history, when compared to the Hermetic writings, certainly. And the other being that they are very largely of a Christian or at least Christian-related substance. And this has done the Gnostic corpus a great deal of damage. The reason that and that's probably important to mention, the reason that the Hermetic books, the corpus of the Hermetic literature, became so soon popular with scholars, and was that it was ostensibly a pagan. It is the name Hermes, who is of course a classical god, is upon it, and so those who were studying the Hermetic books or in some fashion were trying to make use of them could not be accused of being heretics. Now the Gnostics, on the other hand, were heretics from, as we say colloquially, from the word go. And I am proud to say that they remain such, which is a sort of a personal confession. In any event, the discovery of the Hermetic writings, which historically I am pretty well convinced was a reaction of the scholars or various scholars in the Byzantine Empire to save some very ancient and very valuable writings from the coming of the Turks, because we know that the Byzantine Empire fell under the onslaught of the Ottoman Turks and had never returned into Greek hands all that time, never returned into Greek hands. So in any event, these were sort of the circumstances, and now I have promised in the flyers and so forth, and perhaps on the in the computer publicity, I have promised that I would try to present here material about the Hermetic tradition within the context of what I call the esoteric tradition. And I will try to do that. So what I will do, I will mention the sort of the official version, which you will find in encyclopedias and various similar works, which is very largely based on 19th century scholarship, 19th century British scholarship, and which obviously, because of its character, contains very little esoteric material. But on the other hand, we need to keep in mind, which I think was perhaps the recognition that I started this little series by, that it would seem, I am convinced, but for general use I would say it would seem that from very ancient times on, there was always a well, how should we call it, a mainstream spiritual material, mainstream spiritual schools in the world, whether in the East or the West. But that while these mainstream writings are often very enjoyable, and if intuitively studied, they can also be very informative about various profound matters. On the whole, at least on the face of them, they are less esoteric than others that were later discovered. And more, how did that happen? How could, let us say, that the great Greek religion, the even more ancient and profound Egyptian religion, and the Roman, which is really an offshoot of the Greek, all the Roman gods are translated names of the Greek gods. It's nice to see that when that is tabulated somewhere. In any event, it is interesting that while these things slowly developed, somehow an esoteric approach, a different approach, an approach that at least part of the time of its long career was secret, had come to the forefront. The reasons for this we cannot tell, because as probably the ancient Greeks would say, don't try to count time when you are dealing with the gods. They did not consider time a very valuable commodity, and I agree with them, because time is a pain in the neck. You know, as time passes, we get older, we get less healthy, we become more irascible, more nasty to people, and our health, our physical health breaks down. That's what you got to look forward in old age. So go right ahead, folks, and do it. I've done it, so I can tell you about it. See, in any event, that is really not directly related to the subject, but let us say there is nevertheless a factor that is seldom considered, and yet it is, I think, so evident that it relates to the existence and the ongoing stream of the esoteric tradition. And what is that? The presence in the ancient world, particularly in Greece, but also in Egypt and subsequently also in Rome, of one curious institution. And that institution is usually mentioned in the plural, but it is called the mysteries. So from a certain time on, the Greeks and then other people also had come up with the inspiration that with a certain kind of concentration and training, those people who are desirous of such could undergo in an instruction, and more than that, certain initiatory experiences if they applied to certain institutions which were called the mysteries. This started in Greece, but there is some reason to assume that in a different cultural context, there were also mysteries of various sorts, not exactly the same as the Greeks, but mysteries of various sorts in Egypt, and taken from Greece also in Rome. So these experiential activities, which we might call the mysteries, were so highly regarded and so much valued, particularly by those who had gone through them, that they obviously must have been awarding their initiates very exciting and very valuable experiences. I remember the way back when I was a youngster and studying Latin, and so I was afflicted with Latin for 8 years of my schooling, so you may now feel very sympathetic to me. In any event, in course of my Latin instruction, of course, one of the earlier years subject are the writings, or at least some of the speeches of Marcus Tullius Cicero. Cicero, the great orator whose fame had spread throughout the centuries. And Cicero went on record stating that since he went through an initiation of the Eleusinian mysteries, he had totally lost the fear of death, which was good that he lost it, because he was forced to commit suicide, which is not the best way to leave this world. Yeah, he was told that he was on, I think it was on the Sulla or one of the dictators. Dictators like to do those things, whether they are in the 20th century or whether they are in the 2nd century, they like to do those things. And he was told that he was on the list to be eliminated. So I believe, if the records are correct, he got into the Romans loved water. So he got into a big Roman bathtub, he cut all his veins and he bled to death. Not exactly a form of death that I would be fond of or would recommend to anyone else. But in any event, since he had no fear of it, he probably just sat there and watched the water get red. In any event, such and similar statements of great laudations were common in the ancient world, particularly about the Eleusinian mysteries, because apparently the requirements for them, as well as the mystery instruction itself, was particularly pleasing to the people who went there. Now, all right, that being the case, this is the first one of my several theories. I'm not going to unload them all on you tonight, however, but it's the first one, being that the relatively large number of people in Greece, subsequently elsewhere, had prepared a lot of people for unusual experiences and for the ability to draw conclusions from unusual experiences and unusual teachings. And since this was, you might say, a whole class of people who had contact with the mysteries, they understood what nowadays we often call spiritual experiences. They understood those things not as an external subject to hear about, but a matter that they have experienced and that had a profound impact on their character and on their view of reality. And that, of course, would have predisposed a lot more people within those countries to get a glimpse, at least, of what might be called the esoteric tradition. So all we can really say about that in addition to the official, culturally and governmentally sanctioned spiritual or quasi-spiritual practices, because a lot of Roman theater and Greek theater, Greek drama, was itself a spiritual experience. But in any event, a lot of people were prepared for a deeper insight into the subjects which the mysteries communicated to them or allowed them to develop within themselves than may have been the case before. And that being the case in turn, they were susceptible also to an alternative tradition. In modern times, one of my friends, Professor Robert Elwood, the former long-time head of the Department of Religion at USC, whom I have known for many years, for instance, said that spiritual experience is the potential in all people. And if they are subjected to the adequate stimuli, then they will have such experiences. If they are subjected to numerous stimuli, they will have more such experiences. Because this is not as is assumed, for instance, in much of Christian theology, it is not a matter of a special grace which is shed upon people by a God as much, although I wouldn't deny that either, but rather it is a set of indwelling qualities which can be stimulated into action and which will provide people unusual and usually very beneficial experiences. Now, all right, that being the case, it would seem, once again, when we get to these points, then we have to be a little bit tentative about it, that the polytheistic religions, often state religions, of the Greeks, of the Romans, and of the Egyptians, so that pretty much circles the Mediterranean area, these forms of spirituality had inevitably an aspect which was available but not always taken advantage of by the populace, and that this was of a set of teachings and a set of practices which were in addition to, in excess of, and beyond what was communicated or practiced in the official state religions. And that these, in turn, we might say, are the ones that cultivated what throughout the ages became sometimes known as the esoteric tradition. I think it's a 19th century word, when they had, particularly 19th century English is such a joy because it has such impressive and weird words, You just read the word and say, this must be something wonderful. Now, of course, with dirty speech campaigns some years ago and things like that, we have lost all of that. And so it's very important that we cultivate a language that is appropriate to the subject that we are trying to express with the language. And that is why language is very important and should be paid attention in that fashion. Now then, that being the case, let's give some hints. And I give hints only because that's all I have is hints. And the result of many years of looking into these things, and we don't have any certainty because these matters, in terms of their communication to people, and in terms of the effects that these teachings and rites had on people, were secret and were not to be disclosed. So that way, that sort of thing is very difficult to communicate. However, let's put it this way. You all know that the overall cosmology, what in German we call the Weltanschauung, what Max Heindel called the cosmo-conception, which is a somewhat clumsy translation of Weltanschauung into English. In any event, that the world view of the polytheistic world was twofold. And there was an outer and usually state-sanctioned religion, which was combined with the history and the various events that went on in these countries. A great many of the religious and especially the sacrificial customs in the ancient world were remnants that were picked up from history. You know that Rome was probably the only country that we know of in history that actually had holy geese. The capital in Greece, and they had a state-appointed priesthood who ministered to the geese and who took care of everything and so forth. And the reason behind it being that way back in Roman history, as so often, some enemy, some Hannibal type person. Not Hannibal the cannibal, no, but Hannibal the African with the elephants. Anyway, that somebody was coming to attack Rome, and the signal which awakened the populace in Rome and the defense forces was that the geese became excited. And they were jabbering away very wildly because they felt the coming of an inimical bunch of people. I don't think if we're interested in that or not, but since we are here in the Theosophical building and many of us are associated with the Theosophical Society, you know, that was the reason for the maiden name of Helena Petrovna Blavatsky, because her father, who was named Hahn, which in German means rooster. And there were a lot of German officers and military and civilian people working under the Tsars, and so that was an originally German family that moved to Russia. But why was their name von Hahn, which means from the rooster, from the cock? Well, because there was a knight of Hahn with the name of Hahn. Actually, the Hahn family still exists. In fact, a first cousin of mine married one in Austria about 10 years ago, and the Hans. In any event, the issue being that this knight on the crusade was out there somewhere in these unhospitable areas where there has been fighting ever since the beginning of Genesis, right up to now. In any event, so he was awakened by the crowing of a rooster and couldn't sleep. And you know, those babies can really make noise. You better believe it. I was in a place in Hawaii once, a sort of a farm. They do various things there. In any event, the rooster started out while it was still completely dark, and they kept me awake until it was light. So the roosters can be very troublesome. But anyway, Herr Hahn was awakened by the roosters, and as he was walking around in the camp, he saw the Saracens creeping up to the camp. They were about to attack the Crusader camp, even as they would probably do now. But in any event, so he sounded the alarm, and the knights all got up and fought the enemy off. And so when I think the Emperor vom Heiligen Römischen Reich Deutscher Nation, when the Emperor heard about this, he gave Hahn the name of von Hahn. I don't know what his other name was before. He of the rooster. And that is how the family remained. And I'm sure you are just absolutely ecstatic of having heard that story, but it is about Madame Blavatsky and it is about the Hahn family. And I can't tell you how elated I was 20 years ago or so when I was here and a relative of Madame Blavatsky, the late Mr. Boris Zirkov, a wonderful gentleman, was speaking here. And so afterwards I asked him, well, Mr. Zirkov, are there... anyway, I told him the story that my cousin, my girl cousin, was about to marry somebody overseas. And I said, it's Hahn, do you think it's... Oh, he says, there's no doubt about it. All the Hahns are related. And I tell you what, I was walking on clouds for a few days that I am now a bona fide relative by marriage of Madame Blavatsky. You know. Well, you must remember I come from a culture where relatives are important. But in any event, this of course really means something else. But the issue is that there were influences, people who moved around various places and who knew things, who were moving around in Europe, often having acquired some of their esoteric side knowledge in the Middle East, because after all, this was the time when Christian knights regularly, several times a year, would ride to the Holy Land, for which the Christian faith is still being castigated. Oh, they sponsored those terrible crusades. Well, I tell you what, if I had been alive at that time, I would have been in the crusade. You know what? That just didn't have anything to do with anything else. What it had to do with was that it was a period of European history when people were very interested in pilgrimages, and they felt that their soul's welfare would increase if they went to a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And many families that I know of, ancient families, they sacrificed all their fortune in order to outfit a little group of crusaders led by themselves so they could go to the pilgrimage on the Holy Land. Oh, yes. But who was there waiting for them? Arab brigands. You ask the Persians, they tell you what did the Arabs do throughout their history. They will tell you that they engaged in highway robbery. But in any event, that there are brigands on the highways. They would come, they would attack the pilgrims. They would take the women away, they would take animals and money away and things like that, and you were lucky if they didn't kill you. And this went on month after month, year after year, until it became a matter of great annoyance to the European knights who went there. So what did they do? They said, we should organize a crusade, we should go in there and beat these people up, so they're not going to attack our pilgrimages anymore. If you hear that story, then it's a little better than all those terrible crusades. Well, let's say there was good reason for them. In any event, that's just a minor matter. But let us say with the names, and the geese in Rome and things of that sort. So unusual events left their mark on various nations' history, just like the Greeks in Rome, or probably even as far back as Romulus and Remus, the two twins who presumably were raised and nourished and suckled by a mama wolf, which is, I'm sure, an unusual activity even in Italy. But let's say, these things get into the legendary of a people, and then assume various archetypal overtones, the various myths and so forth, and which are also quite instructive. In any event, let's say, when it came to the Pantheon, which is not just a building in Rome, quite a nice one, but it was the temple of all the gods. So the various gods would have their own temples in Rome, but then they dedicated, well, we might as well, it's like All Saints' Day. So this was all Pantheon, and a large number of figures of the gods were standing in the Pantheon along the walls, statues. Now they are saints, pretty much the same thing. In any event, among the many gods, there was also a secret. I think I mentioned that before, but since I'm mentioning now for the second time, it can't be such a very big secret. So the secret was to the effect that these gods had an overall god, an overall deity, that they had a supreme power above them, which they knew and from whom they descended. This was often envisioned as saying, oh, well, so-and-so was the son of Zeus. As history went on, the name given to that supreme deity, according to my little research, was the Egyptian divine name of Amun. Various other Egyptian gods were still called Amun, but with another word added to it. For instance, the sun god, Amun-Ra. So you have another one, but there was only one Amun. And this Amun was envisioned as the ultimate creator and manager of the universe, and the father, as you might say, the creator of all the gods and all the goddesses. So that's one of the big esoteric secrets. And from time to time, this supreme deity would send to earth some person, either an other god or an exalted human being, who was the messenger of the ultimate deity. And when that was the case, it seems, now I'm purely fantasizing, but it's a nice fantasy, that when it came to a certain point in Egyptian history, the Egyptians had already quite a bit of contact with the Greeks. The Egyptians had arrangements which were passed on and probably independently developed by the Greeks too, wherein they could have very real, very vivid spiritual contact with the supernal gods. And so the Egyptian Amun so it would seem now, I'm sort of spinning the story now. The Egyptian Amun wanted another god of lesser stature as whom he could use as his messenger to the humans. And he learned, or he knew, of a Greek god by the name of Hermes. Hermes, the meaning of the word Hermes is that of an assemblage of rocks. And the reason for it being that when Hermes, the god, he was a Greek god for quite some time. When Hermes, the god, came and did some favor for people, the people would honor him by building a curious little handmade, not document, but monument. And that monument was a pyramid-shaped pile of stones. And that is called Hermes. So the Greek countryside was quite populated by these sometimes smaller, sometimes larger pyramid-shaped pile of stones, and they were made as thanks for his help with various things to Hermes, and also to call his attention that people are in need of his services. Now, just to show you how weird I can get, I'll indicate to you also what my very private and probably totally untrue theory is about why the Hermes was shaped more, not as beautifully as an Egyptian pyramid, but it was just rocks put together, but in that shape. As to why it was that shape, well, you would never guess, because it's one of these weird ideas of mine that nobody else has, and maybe that's a good thing. But let's put it this way. If we want to play a little geometry, then we may say that the cosmos, the total universal cosmos, stars, sun, moon, and stars, and everything else, and ourselves, that all of these are to a certain kind of inner sight, a certain kind of esoteric perception. They are shaped, their aggregate is shaped somewhat like a pyramid. In other words, what does that mean? We are at the base of the pyramid. This is Earth. We are the lowest level in our physical bodies. But then, worlds upon worlds upon worlds, hierarchies of angels, of gods and goddesses, of strange creatures going up. But the shape that you can visualize this aggregate is like a pyramid. It gets narrower and narrower and narrower. If by some chance you should have the unspeakable grace of getting right to the top, there you would find the unitary one deity who is really the origin of all the monotheistic faith, and who was called Amun. So Amun sits at the top of the pyramid, and all the various other gods and angels and spirits and all coming down until they reach the earth. So, and the reason that this would be built in order to honor Hermes, because already in those early days the Greeks felt that Hermes was the one who had a contact with the truly transcendental deities. And how do you know that? Have the Roman renaming of Hermes was Mercury. You can see it. And Mercury or Hermes they're pretty much dressed the same way. And what you have is a god who has a helmet on that has wings, who has sandals on that have wings, who has a scepter in his hand with wings. And when he really wants to fly, then he grows wings for the occasion. So Hermes is the flying god, the god with wings. And that being the case, we can keep in mind that these various features of the gods and the goddesses, whether they are Aphrodite, Venus, again one Latin, one Greek, or any of the others, any of their names or their characteristics have symbolic meaning. And so it would seem that Hermes was, to begin with, the one god of the Greek pantheon who had the ability and perhaps even was accustomed to traveling way up to the top of the pyramid and communing with the high gods, including Amun. Now, whether this is too much speculation is hard to tell, but there are additional elements that may be taken into account. Now then, let's say the Greco-Roman Egyptian world now discovers that there is a possibility under certain conditions, and if you have been very deserving of having a contact with the supreme deity Amun and receiving perhaps some directions, some directives for earthly life and so forth, but that this was, it really was considered a secret only communicated to initiates. Now, that being the case, the question is, what's the difference between this and monotheism? Well, I think the difference is that the monotheistic God, whether he is the Lord Adonai of the Jewish faith, or whether he is the Godhead falsely assumed to be the Father of Jesus Christ, these deities are, how should we put it? They are counterfeits of Amun. They are not the real supreme God, but they are pretenders. And they achieve paramount importance among various peoples and then try to run the show. In other words, in Gnostic terms, they are demiurgs and archons. But beyond the demiurgs and the archons, beyond these, beyond the pretenders and the usurpers, there is something real. And Hermes, Mercury, is apparently one of the very few of the Olympian gods who has the ability to communicate with and bring often messages, bring commands from that ultimate source here on earth. What does this remind some of you of? There is a beautiful Gnostic prayer in the Acts of Thomas that's different from the Gospel of Thomas. And in those Acts of Thomas there is a poem which is called the song that our father Saint Thomas sang in the Indies. And it's about, Thomas, Didymus Judas, Thomas the Apostle has been generally believed for a long time of having gone to India. and of having been martyred in India and died and buried outside of the present city of Madras. We had a very nice and lengthy conversation with the Syrian Orthodox Archbishop of Bombay, who was there at a particular meeting, and who told us that they absolutely and definitely believed that St. Thomas died there, and that he was buried in this particular place that is still called St. Thomas Mountain, and then later on the ecclesiastical authorities back in Syria, the Syrian Orthodox Patriarch, begged the church in India to release the body as a relic of Thomas. And then they sent it back to Syria, and you can imagine what happened to it now, what everything is happening around there now. Not a very good story. But in any event, that has the story of a messenger who, like Hermes, like Mercury, comes down to earth to perform a particular task. And it's very, very similar to what in pre-Christian times might have been assigned to Saint Thomas, and in pagan times might have been assigned to Hermes. So what we have is that apparently in ancient times, coming probably the form of worship so might have originated in Egypt, and the conclusion was that from time to time, when the supreme reality desires to convey some important message to the world here below, then someone, a god who is qualified to do that, is sent to do that task. And that from a certain time on, this messenger was Hermes, according to the Greek system. In the Gnostic gospel, this is not really a gospel, it's in the Acts of Thomas. In the Gnostic Acts of Thomas, they don't say that, but they merely indicate that a celestial being comes from above to help out with various things here. Isn't this also somewhat of a prefiguration of the presence of Jesus on earth, who is a messenger, who comes here to perform particular tasks, to bring certain messages, and he also keeps referring to the Father. Who is the Father? I would say that originally that Father was probably the supreme deity. All right, now then. So we have I probably dragged this out and imposed a judgment of boredom upon you, but in rough outline, this is my theory of the relationship of the Supreme, of Amun, as he was called, and the other gods, and how these developments continued. Now, it would be, it would be only natural that the messenger god, who is Hermes, would bring with himself specific instructions and contacts to the people on earth. And when there was a great need for such, then these messages would be given. And that out of these messages, various bibliophiles, writers of sacred scriptures, wrote down the Corpus Hermeticum. So Hermes tells the stories that he knows, and he conveys to people the secret which he brought from above. And what is that secret? Well, I think that those who have listened to some of my my gyrations, verbal gyrations here, will probably remember that the secret is, of course, that the Supreme on top of the pyramid, it's a good little image, or those who have traveled the farthest away from the top of the pyramid, down here at the bottom of the pyramid where we are, that all of these have within themselves the potential of Hermes, or even beyond Hermes, that in a different way and often in a completely unconscious way, we are all children of the Most High. We are all sons and daughters of the Supreme God. And the ultimate essence, as Madame Blavatsky called it, of that ultimate reality dwells within us, waits to be awakened and waits to be developed. And so if you want to have, among other things, a nice archetypal image for what you are aspiring to, we are all aspiring to various status that we never achieve, but let's say if we aspire to become a messenger from on high, to have contact with the highest, then maybe we should meditate on Hermes and on the large number of beautiful writings that are attributed to Hermes. So now we have come to that point wherein the Hermetic message came forth to antiquity, and even the physical, the historical circumstances of the Mediterranean area were subjected to a transformation. And what was that transformation? It was the immense stretch of the empire that was founded and managed until his death by Alexander the Great. Had it not been for that widely spread empire, that you could go without confronting any other government all the way from Memphis in Egypt to Madras in India without being stopped, we don't have it so good. We have to undergo probably 100 passport investigations or so before we get there, if they even let us go. So a matrix was created at the time of Alexander, by Alexander, that made a communication and movement and travel and exchange of all sorts of things, not only commercial goods, but exchange of ideas, exchange of art, all kinds of exchanges, all the way from the Mediterranean to the Indian Ocean. And that in turn, as we might say, created the place where Hermes could put on his wings and fly from one to the other, where the spiritual contact with the transcendental world was afforded and facilitated by the terrain on which it rained. And this was, of course, of great importance. And now, just let us think about it a little bit. Of what spiritual orientation, of what faith were the majority of people, let's say, between Egypt, not America, between Egypt and India? Well, they were, of course, of the various religions of all the gods and the goddesses and so forth, and so that when the common bond that deeply in their soul joined them together, when the common bond was activated, they were all subservient to the ultimate will, to the greatness of Amun. Now, this I think is if this has some veracity, and I'm not a prophet, I have no way of transcendentally verifying these things, but this is a likely theory which I have nourished for many years, and which I believe does have some absolute veracity, although not in all details. So a condition was created wherein the greater teaching, the esoteric teaching, could travel and move and succeed. And out of those travels and out of that movement of mind, shall we say, out of these developed the subsequent great religions of the Middle East, and you might say the ultimate relationship and sometimes even fusion of the Greek, the Egyptian, and the Roman, which are all in the spiritual background of us. And this is of considerable significance. Now, of course, there was a fly in the ointment, as there always is, at least one. There was I'm not going to be diverted to Freddy the Fly, but anyway, there was a gentleman living here on Beechwood years ago who talked with and received replies from animals. And he wrote a book called Talking with Animals. This was way, way back to New Age and all of that. And this man, he collected animals that he was talking with, and the one that he collected, believe it or not, was a fly. And he wrote about the fly in the book, which of course attracts a lot of attention. And so the fly's name was Freddy, and it lived in the house, and as flies do, they didn't have a very long lifespan, but people heard about it, and one of the people who heard about it just very quickly was the great movie mogul who built all the movie theaters on Hollywood, Sid Grauman. And Grauman and his friends were somewhere having a party, no doubt, and somebody told him, you know, there is a man living not very far from here, and he talks with animals, and he has a pet fly. And he said, well, I have to see that. So he went up on Beechwood Drive to this gentleman's house. I can't remember his name now. And so the owner came to the house. He said, what can I do for you, sir? Well, he said, I'm Sid Grauman, and I heard that you have a pet fly. And I'm really so intrigued by that if at all possible, I would like to see that fly. And the fly man since I can think of his name, said, well, yes, I have one. His name is Freddy, but you know, this is the middle of the night, and Freddy sleeps at night. So I don't know whether I can get him here to see you, but I'll try. So he made Mr. Grauman sit down, and he went around the house whistling. And after some whistling, all of a sudden, Freddy had awakened and came to visit them. And Mr. Grauman was totally floored. He almost passed out. That was the strangest experience of his life. Now, why I really brought this up, I'm not sure, but it seemed a good idea at the time. But let us say strange developments occurred from the beginning of time, and certainly from the times that we are aware of, in which constituted in various aspects the esoteric tradition. And the great patron of these, both symbolically, because you know there must be thousands of statues of Mercury, who is Hermes, in the Greek form all over the world. And I know there's one very big, beautiful one in Paris, since we are all imbued with Paris now with the Olympics. But in any event, a tradition now became subterranean because of the coming of Christianity, which really, being a Middle Eastern religion along with Judaism and Islam, was not the most tolerant of religions. And as such, let's say, the Hermetic tradition was there, but was sort of semi-underground. And I have to tell you, one of the manifestations which came out from underground when Egypt was destroyed and when Islam conquered Egypt. And I think I will read to you, just to indicate to you, these Hermetic writings had many predictions, including unhappy ones. Here is the prediction that the Corpus Hermeticum, I think, the individual treatises have their own names. Let's see, in the Asclepius, which is one of the Hermetic writings. And here is the prophecy. O Egypt, Egypt, there will remain of your religion only fables. Those who follow your ideas will be thought mad. Those who disparage your ideas will be celebrated, will be extolled, will be uplifted. The world will be turned upside down. I think he was talking about today's world. It just shows that these bad things have been happening in every age. It says that the world will be turned upside down. But, O Egypt, Egypt, there will come a day when the gods are returned again to their thrones, and you are praised in your glory once again. So this was made for Egypt, which is, of course, the home of, and I didn't mention it, and then why did I bring the statue with me? So let's say one of the acts of divine ecumenicity that occurred when the relationship between Greece and Egypt and ultimately of Rome became very close and intertwined was that there was an Egyptian god whom the Egyptians already had all that time as a manifestation of Hermes. And that god in the Egyptian was called Thoth, the god of wisdom, who had a very high standing in the Egyptian pantheon. He's, being the god of wisdom, he's the one who manages to resurrect Osiris when he's killed and restores the kingdom of Egypt. So a very, very important individual who's, like all the Egyptian gods, have an animal form. I had a student once in school who I thought that she was going to destroy me. I think in that particular class she was the only student, and she said that it was a horrible thing to turn gods into animals. I said to her, I don't think you're much of an animal lover, because I know a lot of people right on my street who treat their dogs and their cats like other people might have treated gods. And not only that, but they are right. They are right. But in any event, this being became fused in the Egyptian mind because they wanted to see their gods with Hermes. So the god Thoth merged with Hermes, and the title given to him was Hermes the Thrice Great, or in Greek Hermes Trismegistus, because he was conceived as being the greatest of kings, the greatest of magicians, wise men, and the greatest of advisors. There are several ways that anyway, he was a triple god and of very great regard and very great importance. So the thrice greatest Hermes remained a very important figure, and what was particularly important about all this was that the tradition of the Hermes now became the thrice greatest Hermes, and it also it absorbed the symbolism and many of the secrets of the pharaonic Egyptian religion, and as such it became that much stronger. Now, let me kid you along a little bit longer with my weird stories. Now I'm really sticking my neck out, but since there is nobody here cutting it, I think I can do that. But let's say with the fall of Egypt, with the coming of the Arabs, with the Muslims to Egypt, which was no joy either, I assure you. And often when I encounter, whether it's Nazis or whether it's book burners, I am reminded of the scene when the Muslim Caliph on his horse rode into Alexandria, and the Egyptians were defeated. And his underlings came to him and said, whatever the title that he assumed, Your Highness, we have a very unusual place here. It is called the library of Alexander, which was founded by one of the Ptolemies. It has the most wonderful and ancient books there, and maybe there were even some locals who were asking that. And he looked down at them. We don't need any books. We only need one book, and that's the Quran. You might want to think that that attitude has not changed all that much, And of course, that was the loss of the Alexandrian library. By the way, if you want to visualize the Alexandrian library, don't visualize a lot of bookshelves, because only toward the very end did they had actual bound volumes. But what you need to keep in mind is they were all scrolled. And it was apparently the greatest collection, at least that our culture knows, of literature. So the Alexandrian library was gone, but something was not gone. And I more or less conclude with that, if you don't mind, for today, because once again I have a number of wonderful things here of Hermetic nature, which I want to communicate to you. But this one that I want to mention has to do with the fact that when the Arabs came and conquered Egypt and tore down all the beautiful old statues, knocked out, what they like to do, the iconoclasts, what they like to do is go up to a beautiful statue, whether it's Greek or Egyptian, and knock off its nose. Now, what kind of a behavior is that, really? Well, it distorts the face completely. In any event, they destroyed a lot of the artwork, all kinds of terrible things. But while doing so, some of them who had a little more sense than the others discovered something. And what was that discovery? They discovered writings that apparently escaped the destruction of the Alexandrian library, and these books were all concerning a strange mythos and a strange art that had to do with transformation. How untransformed substances can be transformed, and how, as the result of a long process of assisted transformation, great spiritual treasures may be discovered. And they called the books Al-Chem. Al is the article in Arabic, and Chem was the name given to Egypt. It means black, the black land. Not because the people living there were Africans, some of them probably were, but mainly because once a year, to this day, I think, the Nile breaks out of its course and floods a large area and covers it with black mud. And this black mud, on the other hand, became very valuable to everybody who lived there, because it creates the most wonderful soil for growing of various plants. And so the Romans, already at the time, Julius Caesar wanted Egypt. Not because he wanted Cleopatra, he could have her anyway, but because he wanted to see to it that they grew the kind of wheat that they could use in Rome, and then the constant traffic, all year long, the traffic of the Egyptian wheat to Egypt, from Egypt to Rome, went on. So that was already the beginning, and meanwhile, even to later time, clear into the 19th century, then the British those clever shopkeepers, as Napoleon called them, the British discovered that other very valuable plants could be grown out of in the black land, among them cotton. So this day we will find cotton, cotton that is called Giza cotton. Giza is for a place in Egypt. Now I'm sure that here too you will just dreadfully happy about hearing that, but let us say in all kinds of ways the old Hermetic strain continued. And now alchemy, which as it had an Arabic word when it was discovered, and the first books, I have to give them credit, the first books that were published on alchemy were published in Arabic. And from there then it spread all over Europe and so forth. And let's say there a spiritual treasure house of major magnitude was discovered when those Arab scholars had discovered the writings on alchemy. And for hundreds and hundreds of years, the model of physical and spiritual transformation was drawn from those alchemical books and from the writings and the work of the alchemists that arose in Europe. All of medieval Europe lived off alchemy. And interestingly enough, I know the statements in academia was made, well, alchemy was just a primitive chemistry and we don't need it anymore. While there was a little broad-shouldered, heavy-set gentleman smoking his pipe in Zurich, and he had already written 5 books about alchemy, psychology and alchemy being the first one. And now we have rediscovered alchemy as a model of interior transformation, of an importance and magnitude as nobody really discovered it before. So the heritage of Hermes, the heritage of the Hermetic arts, of the science as it was called for so long, is still with us. It changes its external appearance, but it is there. And so we shall take a further look at the more strictly religious and spiritual aspects of Hermetica, but let us say certainly, to my mind, because I'm partial to the Christian version, which is Gnostic, that is sort of the most appealing, but I must say that had it not been for the rediscovery and the continued practice of alchemy throughout the ages, all of Western culture would be in a much poorer shape. So the gift of Hermes and the gifts of Hermes are still with us. And to the extent that we are so inclined, let us follow the advice of the Asclepius, who says that, yes, the gods are going to come back, alchemy is going to come back, Hermes is going to come back, if we are there to receive them. I think that is a very important, a major tradition that has come to us and that in various forms is still with us, and that requires a great deal of attention and a great deal of reverence, and possibly, as indeed it is happening, revival. So I spent a lot of time historicizing, but I will do less of that next time. And I have some of my texts here of Hermetic writings that you're really going to like. So every Friday I tell you, if you come back next week, it's going to be better. See? But maybe I shouldn't be so self-effacing, which is, after all, one of my chief characteristics. So anyway, I hope that this has been of interest to you, because you not only hear about alchemy, there's one beautiful book of alchemy that I have to bring next time that has been recently published. It's written by the curator of the alchemical collection of Getty. Beautiful, beautiful illustrations on it. I think it's just called Alchemy, but I'll show it to you. It's not a cheap book, but it's beautifully produced and wonderful illustrations in it. In any event, these things are still with us. Why? Because Hermes, flying through the air with his wonderful wings and carrying his winged scepter, is coming back. And when he comes back, perhaps then the famed New Age and all of that, when added to the Christian gnosis, then maybe there will be a true return in a big way of the esoteric tradition. May we experience it in this world, in the next. May we be grateful for it, for what it was, and what it is, and what it will be. Long live Hermes.